So with e-bikes becoming more popular, many people are ditching their analog bikes in order to buy one. Or what if you want the ability to have the functionality of having both an e-bike and an analog bike both on the same bike? Well, a company called Bimotal has developed an e-bike conversion kit called the Elevate with people like you in mind. So the Elevate system consists of 4 main parts: the drive unit, a battery pack, a brake rotor gear, and a throttle. So first is we have the drive unit, which feels very high quality and it's pretty lightweight, only weighing in about 3.3 pounds. It has 750 watts of power and provides up to 60 newton meters of continuous torque up to 20 miles per hour, making it a Class 2 kit. The Elevate is a throttle design that can handle up to 15% grades, but anything steeper you should pedal. Bimotal also recommends pedaling all the time to improve range. And the battery is a 52 volt, 6 amp hour lithium ion battery pack with Samsung cells that measures 4 inches by 6 inches by 3 inches. It weighs in about 3.5 pounds and attaches to your water bottle mount. It has a typical range between 10 to 15 miles, between 1,600 and 3,500 feet of climbing, and a charge time of 1.5 hours. The rotor gear replaces your disc brake rotor. It has a gear on the inside of the rotor where the teeth of the drive unit attaches to provide power. It's pretty robust and designed to last at least 3,000 miles. At the time of recording, there are 180 and 203 millimeter rotor options, but Bimotal is currently working on a 160 millimeter and a 223 millimeter option as well. So for the throttle, I'm actually going to be testing a prototype push button option, which at the time of recording is not the throttle that comes with the Elevate system. The current throttle is a rocking paddle throttle. Bimotal is working on the new version due to customer feedback about the current throttle, which is much larger and bulky, and it doesn't fit as cleanly with the dropper lever. The new push button throttle is much smaller, fits much better with the dropper lever, and is much more ergonomic. So essentially how it works is you have a mounting system attached to your rear brake caliper that the drive unit attaches to. Then you replace your rear brake rotor with a supplied Bimotal rotor that has a gear attached. When you push the throttle, the motor activates and it spins the rotor gear. But there are some caveats for compatibility if you want to fit an Elevate to your bike. You have to have 4-piston hydraulic disc brakes, and your rear brake caliper has to have an external or ISO mount. So now that we've gone over the Elevate, let's install this bad boy. So I have to say, the installation wasn't too bad, and it took me about 30 to 40 minutes to install. The directions on the website are a tiny bit confusing, but Bimotal does have an installation video to help me out a lot. But I do consider this moderate difficult to install, so if you're not mechanically inclined, you might want to have a professional install it for you. Bimotal does have certified installers, and the expected cost to install is between $100 and $150. So I decided to install the Bimotal on my Ragley Mmmbop Hardtail. That's a bike that I built to be a downhill slayer with its mullet setup, 160mm fork, and a 63-degree head tube angle. I chose this bike specifically because it's my favorite bike I've ever ridden. Climbing is its biggest weakness. I have thousands of miles on this bike, so I'll be able to tell how the Bimotal affects riding characteristics, and I'm not aware of any electric hardcore hardtails that exist, so why not have the first? There's also a Bimotal app that in my opinion is a must, since it tells you how much battery you have left over, and more importantly, you can choose between 3 power settings: range, flow, and elevate. What's also pretty cool is you can tune each setting as well, so the power is delivered exactly the way you want it. For my testing, I want to take the Bimotal to 2 different types of trail systems. The first was a very steep single track trail where the climbs are tight and loose, the downhills are steep, fast, and with many trail features. Something I want to clarify before we get into how it rides is that I use the Bimotal as a pedal assist only, using the power while pedaling, not just the throttle. So on this trail, the first climb is actually a very steep dirt road climb that's not technical at all, but it gave me a chance to see how the bike handled going straight up. This part of the trail is only a mile long, but there's over 500 feet of elevation gain in that mile, and I was using the Elevate mode and I easily powered up the steepest hills, with the steepest climb being about 16% gradient. Once I got into the single track, this is where things got really tight, and the system actually worked really well. In the Elevate power setting, it's a little bit of a challenge to modulate the throttle, but I did change to the flow setting that lowers the power output, and honestly, I love that setting and use it for the remainder of my testing. One thing about the climbs is you can feel the extra weight of the motor over the back of the bike, which causes the front wheel to get a little floaty on the steep climbs, which even is more obvious on my slacked out hardtail, which has that problem without the motor on the back. But a positive attribute is that the extra weight added extra traction to the rear tire, and I didn't have any slippage even though the trail was loose. Once I got to the top, I removed the motor and I put it in my pack. I started heading down some of my favorite trails, which are tight and have some tech and jumps. I took off the motor because I didn't want the extra weight on this particular trail, and even Bimotal recommends removing the motor when going down trails with a lot of bumps and jumps. So one huge positive of riding with the Elevate, especially on loose trails when the motor is taken off, is that the bike actually has more grip. I think this was due to the extra weight of the battery, and since it's located on the water bottle mount, and the additional weight was located at the center and low part of the frame. And while removing the motor does have the added benefit of better handling, the negative is that I have to carry a 3.5 pound motor in my pack, which is very noticeable, especially since I wear a hip pack. But once I was done with my downhill, I was able to put the motor back on and start pedaling to the top for another lap. I'm fully aware that everyone has different types of trails near them, and some don't ride steep trails with a lot of tech. So I also took the Bimotal to a more traditional trail with easier single track riding and even some pavement climbs. And while the Elevate did a really good job at the steep trails, I think this type of trail is really where it shines. There's a lot of open space, and if there's no other people around, you can really open the bike up and haul pretty quickly up the trail. The first 2 miles of the ride is a paved road and was pretty easy. Then I started heading up the dirt trail and I was in heaven. Pedaling was easy with little drama, and soon enough, I was at the top of the first trail. So this trail is very flowy and is absolute single track bliss. But I did move the motor just because it's about a 4-minute downhill that does get a little chunky about halfway down. The solid handling remained, and I was able to go down the trail at a pretty good pace. But even though I did have to put the motor in my hip pack, it wasn't as bad because this trail has no jumps or anything super techy, and there were less bumps to deal with, so the pack wasn't bouncing around as much. So the last thing I wanted to test was how the bike handled with the motor actually attached to the bike while going downhill. So I pedaled back up to the top of the trail, and the climb really wasn't that steep, but had much more turns. I already put a decent amount of miles on the Bimotal, so by this time I had the throttle modulation down, and I was still using the flow power setting. So I dropped into the trail with the motor attached, and I can confirm that the bike does handle pretty good, but it does have a lot of weight on the back, which did throw off the weight distribution, with a really heavy rear bias. And if you've ever ridden an e-bike with a rear hub motor, then you have an idea of how the Elevate affected my bike. It's nothing too bad, as long as you don't hit any big bumps or jumps. Obviously, the slower you go, the less it affects the handling, but at higher speeds, you will notice the weight. So after finishing this downhill, I decided to climb back up the hill to try and drain the battery, which I finally did. And I can confirm that from one battery, I went a total of 21.93 miles with 3,113 feet of climbing, which I think is pretty impressive from a 300 watt battery. So overall, I'm pretty impressed by the Bimotal Elevate. It has a lot of power and it works really well. I'm a big fan of having the ability to convert almost any bike to an e-bike, and the fact that you can remove the motor in seconds is a huge bonus. To me, this is the type of technology that moves the bike industry forward, but while I do like the Elevate, I think there's some drawbacks with this type of design. First is that you lose the ability to use your water bottle mount, which forces you to use a pack, and if you plan on taking off the motor anytime during the ride, then you have to plan accordingly. The second drawback is that since it is a throttle, it's technically a Class 2 system, which means that it would be illegal on many Class 1 e-mountain bike trails. Mind you, if you use the throttle as a pedal assist like I did, I don't think too many people would be mad, but this does need to be mentioned. The next drawback is that you have to have a 4-piston caliper to use the system, so if your bike is a 2-piston, you have to anticipate to spend extra money on another caliper. And talking about money, this might be the biggest issue that people find with the Elevate, and that's the price. This kit is not cheap, and for a lot of people, this will be a deal breaker. I've been going back and forth if the Elevate is worth the $2,000, and it's tough to decide. And I do realize that $2,000 is a lot of money, but the build quality of the system is pretty impressive, and I can't imagine the amount of money and time that went into the R&D to make the Elevate. And when you take into account that Bimotal is a super small company, it is pretty amazing what they created. But there's no denying it's a lot of money, and it's about half the cost of a reasonably priced full squish e-mountain bike. So do I recommend the Elevate? Well, it depends on you, the rider. If you want to exclusively ride only an e-mountain bike, and you don't mind spending thousands and thousands of dollars on an existing e-mountain bike, then I don't think the Elevate is for you. And if you ride a lot of chunky downhill and don't want to carry a motor in your pack, then the Elevate also isn't for you. But if you only want one bike that can be both an analog and electric assisted bike, then the Bimotal is for you. Or if you have a bike you already spent a lot of money on and there's nothing else like it on the market, the Bimotal is also for you. Or you just love the bike that you have and you want the ability to crush climbs, then the Bimotal Elevate's for you. So even though there are some compromises with the Bimotal, and I'm sure the price will have people split on if it's worth it or not, I'm just happy that there's a company that's doing something different and thinking outside the box. And for that, I have a lot of respect for the team at Bimotal and I have to tip my hat to them. But if you have any questions about the Bimotal or have an Elevate system yourself and want to share your experience, please leave them in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching and have a great one. Hey turkey. Gobble, 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 gobble. Later guys.